Hey guys, how's it going? Comparing here. So, I've been watching some Path of Exile streams, and hey, I've died myself a few times. What I want to talk about is the circumstance, at least the Nemesis, which leads to people dying. Now, in Nemesis, there's like this Nemesis mod, and some of them are pretty scary, but in general, they're pretty vanilla. Like nothing really happens. You know, blessing elements, and sometimes people see like fractured, they don't really care. But usually, what ends up happening in the case of where someone dies is there's a particularly nasty combination of base modifications that amplify the Nemesis mod for it to be extremely powerful. And this is something that people don't really realize, especially players who are just new playing the game. Now, I'll be honest, this video is pretty much inspired by Athene. Athene just happened to die on his prized character, first rare monster he encountered in Merciless. Yeah, he was pretty unlucky to encounter. Yeah, he played pretty sloppy, but that's usually what it takes to lose your character. So what exactly happened in his case was he died to corrupting blood, and corrupting blood is sometimes a pretty nasty modification, but other times it does no damage. So people don't really understand where the damage comes from, and I want to kind of bring some light to it. Now I don't know exactly how it works, but from experience, from hearing others talk about it, I have a pretty good idea, and I want to share that with you guys so you guys can have, at least some of the more conventional knowledge about these modifications. So let's get to it. Now, there are a few, like I mentioned, that can be pretty scary. So something like Fractured can be pretty scary, even though some people don't realize it. Yeah, it spawns a bunch of white monsters. Yeah, you kill white monsters all the time, but sometimes the surprise can get your ass killed. So why does this happen? Well, Fractured, if you're doing like a map with minus max and you're, killing like a monster, let's say one of those Arctic Breath Leapers, Garatha ended up dying this way, where he killed one of these and it was fractured, so it split in like 6 or 7, and then he got one-shotted because they all Arctic Breathed him all at once. So the best idea to combat Fractured, regardless of the type of monster that it is to queue up a large AoE right as the monster dies. So if you're Spectral Throw, if you're like melee kind of deal, you just Spectral Throw like crazy, and when the monster dies, the Spectral Throws that return end up killing the monster. And you do this over, choosing the other option of like double striking the monster down, because when it gets fractured, you're surrounded. So, nothing too big, but, some issues can occur. The other that is a little bit out of line of the majority is the Soul Conduit. So Soul Conduit, what happens is if you kill a monster with this attribute, it is going to resurrect, and it's going to resurrect with all the other little fucks around him. And it's only going to do this once, and I don't believe you can res a resed monster a second time. So if there's 2 Soul Conduits, you don't have much to worry about. But what has happened to a few people is there is another modification called like Bringer of Bones or something. They just summon skeletons the whole time, which is like one of the easiest things ever. But the problem is when you combine that with Soul Conduit, I've not experienced this, but what I have heard is the Soul Conduit reses all the stupid ass skeletons that you killed, and if you don't have much damage, and there's like hordes of skeletons that you've killed, what happens is your computer like crashes when the whole screen reses. And in general, you want to avoid killing a Soul Conduit monster in the proximity of multiple corpses. So that's just a little bit of something, but if you have very good AoE, it's nothing really to worry about. Like when I'm playing a Discharger Soul Conduit, I don't give a fuck. Now, the other type of modifications that I want to go over that are really dangerous scale in a way that people don't really realize. Now, these modifications include all the volatile shit. So volatile Ice Blood, volatile Flame Blood, volatile Storm Blood. These are pretty much the same modification, but they kind of occur a lot because there's 3 separate ones, so the instance that you see it is increased. Now, what happens with this modification is when you kill the monster, it blows up in an AoE, kind of like its own corpse exploding in your face. And sometimes this does no damage. Other times, it does some pretty fucking scary damage. So where does this variance come from? Before I go into that, there's going to be the other case with Corrupting Blood, which is the Athene Slayer modification. It's also slayed quite a few other people. Corrupting Blood triggers when you attack the monster and connect, and it gives you a stack of a bleed, and the stack I think lasts like 4 seconds or something like that, and you keep stacking it. If you keep attacking, it goes to 20, and it's 20 times as strong as one stack, and the damage is physical. It's a bleed, but it's not reduced by your armor, because physical damage bleeds, just go directly on you. In other cases where you face bleeds in the game, they're based on the original physical damage of a puncture, but this is directly a bleed. So you cannot mitigate the damage in any way except for dropping the stacks using a bleed pot or killing the monster in relatively few hits. The other monster that kind of goes in this category of corrupting blood and volatile, I believe, a little bit more on a limb on this one, but I'm pretty sure it works this way, is Storm Herald. When you face a Storm Herald monster, you're pretty much facing a monster that is raining down lightning, kind of like the Phase 1 Piety ability. And this ability can be pretty scary if you're doing like a minus max map, but in general, if you can kill the monster relatively quickly, you don't have that much to worry about. So you got these set of monsters, and what they have in common is the damage for all these Nemesis modifications is based on the damage of an auto swing. So why is that relevant? Where some monsters attack really quickly and do pretty good damage, kind of like these spike things in Act 3, or if you want a more common example, like spiders in Act 2, they don't hit very hard, but they hit pretty fast. Shit like monkeys, that kind of stuff. Their damage per hit is extremely low. Where on the flip side, if you face a monster like a zombie, while you may not know it because zombies are so slow and so, it's so unlikely that you actually get hit by one in Path of Exile, their main hand damage is insane. And, in other cases, you have like monsters like golems, monsters like bears, there's a lot of monsters in the game that have crazy high single hit damage. And that's what's important because all this damage scales off of that. But you probably killed a few zombies, you probably killed a few golems, and you've not taken that much damage from volatile ice blood or corrupting blood or storm herald. So you're probably asking what the missing ingredient is, and hopefully, I can bring that to light here. Well, very often when you're facing a rare, it has other modifications, and these other modifications can include additional damage as cold, additional damage as fire, additional damage. You can have a substantially increased physical aura, or it can have an increased physical aura, or it can have the combination of the two auras if there's two rares beside each other. And all these, while individually may not be a huge deal, can be, even though it may not seem like it when you're facing the monster. So what I mean by this is if you're facing a zombie, and let's say he has added cold damage, it's going to hit you for a lot, but it's mostly going to be physical. You're not going to notice the difference between a physical hit and a physical hit with cold because, physical hit's not going to be mitigated by your armor very much. It's going to seem like a big portion, and the cold is going to be mitigated by your armor a lot because you have very, very high resists, most likely. So you're not going to really understand how much extra base damage the monster does from the cold when it gets converted through one of the Nemesis mods. In my experience, I've seen like additional cold, additional fire, substantial physical, and like corrupting blood. Holy cow, you're talking about like over 1,000 damage a second, like for just a few stacks. So it gets really crazy. When you're playing the game in Path of Exile, it's a pretty good idea to you really be observant. You want to look at the monsters, modifications. The Nemesis mod is often not going to be a big deal. But when you see Volatile Ice Blood, pretty much what you want to be doing is you want to read the other list of modifications. So something like, the few things I've mentioned may have a pretty scary effect when it stacks on top of you, and especially if you don't have the cap resistance of the type that it's going to blow up in your face. So, some pretty scary stuff out there. More than often, you can take these modifications for granted, but from what I have seen, usually when someone dies, it's, the stars align, and in the end, it's the Nemesis mod that does the finishing punch. It's a very good idea to be very aware of what's going on, be very aware of your health, and, don't lose your prized character in Path of Exile. So, hope you guys learned something. I'll see you guys tomorrow.